Money doesn't just change hands. It declares status, draws lines, exposes truths people pretend aren't there. On paper, she was the ideal client, a black entrepreneur with contracts most companies only dream about, her name inked on deals worth millions. But for them, that was the problem. They didn't see the business owner, the strategist, the employer of dozens. They saw someone they decided couldn't possibly belong. And so they questioned, doubted, insulted, tore up what she'd built with casual cruelty. What they didn't know was that this single petty act would ignite a chain reaction that would strip them bare in front of the world. This is the story of what happens when quiet, smiling gatekeepers forget that the person they're trying to keep out is the one holding the keys to everything they value. Want more stories that refuse to look away from the truth? Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your take. She walked into Branford National Bank just after 9 in the morning, the glass doors hissing shut behind her as she stepped onto the glossy tile floor. The bank was modern and gleaming, with bright lighting that reflected off polished marble counters and muted corporate art on the walls. A handful of customers sat in sleek armchairs waiting to be called. The atmosphere hushed except for the soft clicking of keyboards and the quiet murmur of bankers consulting clients in cubicles. She adjusted the strap of her leather bag on her shoulder and held the check in her hand carefully, glancing down at it with the small satisfaction of seeing such a large amount clearly written. Over $650,000, the payment for months of work on a major municipal contract. This was the culmination of years of planning, meetings, late nights, and relentless negotiating. She was proud of it, proud of her team, proud of her company's ability to deliver on a scale that big. Today should have been simple: deposit the check, get the funds posted, and move on to the dozen other tasks waiting for her that morning. She approached the counter, choosing a line that led to a teller named Brent. He was in his 40s, dressed in the bank's crisp navy uniform, with a close-cropped beard and sharp gray eyes that didn't exactly radiate warmth. She waited politely as he finished up with the elderly man ahead of her, watched him smile and wish him a good day with effortless charm. Then it was her turn. She smiled politely, stepping forward with confidence, and placed the check neatly on the counter between them. "Good morning," she said in her professional, even tone. "I'd like to deposit this into my business account." Brent's smile didn't appear this time. His eyes flicked down to the check, scanning the amount, and immediately she saw something shift in his expression. A microsecond of hesitation, a hardening around the eyes, a subtle downturn at the corner of his mouth. She felt it in her gut instantly, the cold, sinking recognition that she'd been here before. Brent didn't immediately reach for the check scanner. Instead, he picked up the paper between his thumb and forefinger like it might be contaminated and squinted at it with exaggerated care. "This is quite a sum," he said flatly, enunciating each word as if she might not understand. She kept her face calm. "Yes," she replied smoothly. "We just completed a city contract. This is the final payment." Brent's eyebrow twitched upward, skepticism written clearly across his face. He didn't look at her again, just kept turning the check under the light, examining it for watermarks that were obvious at a glance. "May I see some identification?" he asked finally. His tone even, but completely devoid of the polite polish she'd watched him use on the previous customer. She nodded and produced her driver's license and her business card, the latter embossed with the company logo, and her title in crisp lettering. She placed them carefully in front of him. Brent picked them up slowly, studying them as if he expected to find something amiss. The silence stretched. She resisted the urge to clear her throat, knowing it would only confirm the power he was exerting over the moment. She watched as he typed something into his computer, the keys clacking too loudly in the quiet. Finally, without returning her ID, he set it aside on the counter. He didn't hand it back. He didn't scan the check. Instead, he rested his elbows on the counter and leaned forward slightly. "Do you have proof you're authorized to make this deposit?" he asked. She blinked once, fighting to keep her voice level. "I'm the owner. That's my business account. The account number is on the check. You can see it matches our records." Brent didn't move. He didn't glance at the screen that would confirm exactly that. Instead, he stared at her with studied blankness. "We need more than just your say-so," he said, each word delivered with oily patience. "This is a large amount. We have to make sure it's not fraudulent. You understand, right?" She felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the counter. She exhaled through her nose. "It's our standard operating payment," she said, forcing calm. "We do this every month, sometimes more. You can check the account history." Brent didn't check anything. He gave a small, dismissive huff, tapping the check with his pen. "Ma'am, a lot of people try to pass off fraudulent checks, especially for amounts this large. We have protocols." She felt the heat rising in her chest. "So follow the protocol," she said, her voice tight. "Verify the account. Call the issuing bank. That's your job." Brent's lips twitched, the ghost of a sneer. "My job is to protect our institution from risk," he said, leaning back slightly. "If you're really the owner, you should have no trouble proving it." He said it slowly, deliberately, the words like a dare. Around them, she was aware of other customers glancing over, pretending not to listen, but definitely watching. She felt every muscle in her back tense as she straightened her posture. She didn't let her voice rise. "You have my ID, my business card, the account number. It matches your records." Brent shrugged, eyes narrowing slightly. "You'd be surprised how many people try to scam banks with fake businesses, especially these days." The words landed like slaps. She felt the blood roar in her ears, but forced herself to keep her expression neutral. "I'd like to speak to the branch manager," she said evenly. Brent's eyes didn't waver. He picked up the phone at his station without another word, pressing a single button and muttering something she couldn't hear. He didn't look at her again while they waited. She stood there, every second stretching out painfully, her jaw set like iron. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute or two, a man in a dark suit appeared from the side office. The branch manager. He approached with the same carefully guarded expression. Brent handed him the check and her ID without saying a word, as if silently communicating what he thought of the situation. She didn't look away from the manager as he greeted her with an unconvincing attempt at warmth. "Good morning. Is there a problem?" he asked, voice too smooth. She didn't bother smiling. "No problem. I'm trying to deposit a payment into my business account. Your teller is refusing to process it." She had learned a long time ago that stillness could be power. After several minutes, the manager walked back over to Brent's counter, glancing at the check one more time before turning toward her with a measured expression that failed to disguise his suspicion. He gestured for her to approach again. She stood slowly, refusing to hurry, her heels clicking with authority against the marble floor. She returned to the counter, meeting his eyes squarely. "Ma'am," he began in a tone he probably thought was calming, but which sounded more like a warning. "We've reviewed your request, but given the amount on this check, we're going to need further verification that you're authorized to deposit it." She let out a slow, steady breath, aware of every ear in the room that seemed to tune in at once. "As I explained to your teller, I'm the owner of this business. This is our business account. The account number is right there on the check. You have my ID. You have my business card. I've deposited checks before, many times." The manager's mouth twitched downward at the corners. "Yes, I understand, but you have to appreciate that we have protocols in place for transactions of this size. We can't just take any large check without verifying ownership. It's policy." She raised an eyebrow deliberately. "Policy. So show me where that policy is written, or apply it equally. Have you asked the last customer you served for proof he owned his business?" The manager blinked once, caught, then schooled his face back into neutrality. Brent stood just behind him, arms folded smugly, tapping one finger against his bicep, as if daring her to escalate. The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I don't want this to become confrontational. We're simply asking for documentation that proves you're authorized on this business account." She leaned in slightly, voice low and sharp. "You already have that. My ID matches the name on the check and the account. My business card shows my title and company, and I've been banking here for years. There is no question of my authorization." The manager shook his head with rehearsed regret. I'm sorry, but that's not sufficient for a transaction this large. We need official documentation from your company. A letter of authorization, articles of incorporation, something current that proves your ownership." She stared at him, stunned at the audacity. "You know damn well that's not required for a deposit into an existing, verified business account that has been used here before." His tone cooled immediately. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We're trying to help you, but you need to comply with the process." She straightened her back. "No, you're not trying to help. You're trying to block this transaction because you don't believe I own this business. Say it." The manager's eyes flickered around nervously, aware of the tension spreading across the room as the other customers tried and failed not to listen. Brent's smirk widened fractionally behind him. The manager spoke carefully. Each word weighted to imply reasonableness while dripping with condescension. "We are applying standard policy. We apply it to all large transactions." She didn't break eye contact. "Then let's call your regional manager right now and ask if this is policy. Or better yet, I can call your corporate customer support line myself, on speaker, and ask them. I'll wait right here." He hesitated, throat bobbing as he swallowed. Brent shot him a look, an unspoken prompt to hold the line. Finally, the manager shook his head once. "That won't be necessary. We'll be happy to process the deposit as soon as you provide the additional documentation. Until then, I'm afraid there's nothing further we can do today." She felt the fury coil in her stomach like a snake. She inhaled deeply, biting back the words that would get her forcibly removed. Instead, she spoke with icy precision. "I want your full name. I want your district manager's contact information. And I want the exact written policy you're citing." A man in an expensive camel coat waltzed up with a big smile and left with a receipt in under 2 minutes. A woman with a stroller was offered help carrying her paperwork. An older man with a cane was shown to a chair near the teller so he didn't have to stand too long. All of them served with that bank's glossy promise of friendliness and professionalism. All while she sat there and waited, and waited, and waited. The seconds dragged. Then the minutes. 10, 20, 30. Her phone battery percentage ticked lower as she mindlessly scrolled, pretending to read emails she couldn't focus on. She shifted in the uncomfortable chair. At one point, she stood up and walked to the counter to try again. Brent saw her coming, his face immediately hardening. Before she even opened her mouth, he held up one hand. "Ma'am, I told you. You'll need to wait while we verify your information." She clenched her jaw. "You haven't verified anything. You've just been sitting here ignoring me." Brent's mouth curled. He spoke slowly and clearly, voice pitched just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We are following protocol. Large deposits require special approval. You'll have to be patient, or come back another time when you have the proper paperwork." She felt the flush rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice low and tight. "You're lying. There is no such protocol for this account. You're making this up." Brent's eyebrows shot up in mocking surprise. "Excuse me? Did you just accuse me of lying?" He turned to the customer at the next window and spoke, stage whispering, but plenty loud enough. "Some people think they don't have to follow the rules. Don't worry, sir. We'll get you taken care of right away." The other customer gave her a glance, eyes flicking over her with mild disapproval, before focusing studiously on his own business. She realized her fingers were clenched so tight around her phone that they hurt. She forced herself to breathe. Behind Brent, the branch manager emerged from his office and approached the counter. He didn't look at her at first, just at Brent. "Is there an issue?" he asked, as if she weren't even standing there. Brent shrugged elaborately. "She doesn't seem to understand our policies. She refuses to wait while we confirm her authorization. Says she's the owner. But you know how it is with these situations. Gotta be careful." He said it with a knowing tilt of the head. The manager finally turned to her, face stiffly polite. "Ma'am, I explained earlier that we can't deposit this check until we verify everything. That process can take time. If you're not able to wait, you're welcome to come back another day." She blinked at him slowly, once, twice, as the meaning of his words sank in. "Come back another day," she repeated, her voice low with incredulity. The manager didn't blink. "Yes, when you have the correct documentation." She wanted to scream. She wanted to slam her palm down on the counter, but she didn't. She inhaled deeply through her nose. "You're making me wait for no reason. You're humiliating me in front of everyone here." Brent made a sound, half scoff, half laugh. "We're protecting the bank, ma'am. If you're legit, you have nothing to worry about." She felt the blood roaring in her ears. Around her, she was keenly aware of the people watching, some openly, some pretending not to, but leaning in just enough to hear. The woman with the stroller frowned at her before quickly looking away. The older man with the cane shifted uncomfortably. The man in the camel coat pretended to examine the brochures on the side table, but his ears were turned in her direction. She wanted to shrink into the floor. Instead, she stood her ground. "Call corporate," she said, voice shaking only slightly. "Right now. Put me on the phone with someone who actually knows the policy." After nearly an hour of this quiet siege, the branch manager emerged from his glass-walled office with deliberate slowness, adjusting his tie like a man preparing for a performance. He gestured to her with a stiff little wave, beckoning her back to the counter. She rose carefully, the ache in her back sharp from sitting so long on the hard chair, and walked with even steps that rang on the marble. As she approached, she felt the eyes of the room following her. She didn't break her stare from the manager's face. He cleared his throat as she stopped at the counter, placing both palms on the surface like he was laying claim to it, and spoke in a low, measured voice that carried just enough to be heard by the people around them. "Ma'am, let's talk about this calmly. I think you need to understand why we're doing this." She didn't answer. She simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. He continued, adopting what he probably thought was a patient, educational tone. "When someone comes in with a check this large, especially for a business account that doesn't often process these kinds of sums, we have to be extra careful. It's for your safety as much as ours." She could feel her fingers curling into her palm. She willed them to relax. "I am the owner of the business," she said evenly. "I've deposited large checks here before. I have identification. You have the account on file." The manager offered a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate that. But fraud is a real concern. You'd be surprised how many bad actors try to pass off forged checks or use fake businesses to launder money." He said the words slowly, like he was describing arithmetic to a child, emphasizing each syllable. "It's not personal. We have to follow procedure. We're required to confirm ownership and legitimacy." She felt the heat rise up her neck. "You haven't even tried. You didn't check my account history. You didn't call anyone. You're making me wait here while you serve everyone else. That's not procedure. That's discrimination." His expression didn't flicker. Brent behind the glass snorted a quick, dismissive sound, not even bothering to hide it. The manager's lips twitched at the corners, as if suppressing his own smirk. "Ma'am, there's no discrimination here. We apply this to everyone. But you have to understand, there are banks that specialize in serving certain communities. Smaller banks, credit unions. They might be better equipped to help you." She stared at him. "Smaller banks," she repeated flatly. He nodded solemnly. "Yes, community-focused institutions. They know their clients better. They're more flexible. They might be able to accommodate you more easily. You wouldn't have to deal with these policies." The words landed like slaps. He spoke them slowly, gently, patronizingly, dripping with that corporate courtesy that let him say something outrageous while pretending it was advice. She didn't blink. She didn't break. She just watched his face until his fake smile started to waver. He cleared his throat again. "Look, I'm just trying to help you avoid frustration. If you come prepared with the right documentation," she cut him off. "Define it." His mouth opened, then closed. She pressed. "Define the documentation you want. In writing. Show me your policy." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Brent, who shrugged, clearly enjoying the show. The manager stammered. "It's not something we have in a brochure. It's internal guidelines." She lifted her chin. "So it doesn't exist." He straightened, offended. Of course it exists. It's just not something we hand out to customers. Because you make it up as you go, she said coolly. He flushed. Ma'am, you need to understand, we're just protecting the bank. She didn't lower her voice. From who? From people like me. He went silent. The tension stretched. She felt the room, leaning in. She could almost hear the intake of breath from the old man 3 chairs down, the cough from a mother with the stroller, the embarrassed shuffle of the suited man pretending to read a brochure. The manager finally exhaled. If you can't comply with our procedures, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do today. She nodded once sharply. She wouldn't be the one to break it. She refused to give them that. Instead, she sat straight-backed and silent, a monument to fury contained. But she was not leaving. She was not going to let them dismiss her from her own bank like an uninvited guest. Minutes bled into an hour. She checked her phone, sending a curt email to her assistant letting them know she'd been delayed at the bank, carefully leaving out the real reason. She wasn't sure she wanted that embarrassment shared yet, even with the people who worked for her. She scrolled aimlessly, jaw locked. Then finally the door to the manager's office swung open again, and he strode out with a set expression, Brent turning to greet him with a conspiratorial nod. The manager motioned toward her with a curt jerk of his head. "Ma'am," he called out, voice firm, too loud for the quiet lobby. She rose slowly, smoothing the front of her blazer, meeting his eyes with a calm that was like ice over deep water. She approached the counter, and this time Brent didn't even bother to pretend to serve anyone else. He folded his arms and leaned back, eager to watch the show. The manager cleared his throat. "We've given you ample opportunity to provide the required documentation," he began formally, ignoring the muttered, "Yeah, right," from a teenager waiting in line behind her. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply waited. He pressed on. "You're continuing to disrupt operations by refusing to leave or comply with our verification procedures. At this point, if you don't vacate the premises voluntarily, I'm afraid we'll have to involve the authorities." Her mouth tightened so hard it hurt. She tilted her head slightly, voice calm. "Call them." That made Brent blink. The manager's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." She raised her eyebrows. "Call them. I'll wait right here. I'd love to explain to the police why I'm being forcibly removed from my own bank while trying to make a deposit into my own business account." A hush fell. A woman 3 spots back in line shifted uncomfortably. The old man with the cane coughed awkwardly. Even Brent's smirk slipped a little. The manager's nostrils flared. He dropped his voice slightly, leaning forward. "Don't make this worse for yourself," he warned, the courtesy veneer cracking to reveal the threat beneath. She didn't step back. "I'm not making anything worse. You're making this worse by refusing to do your job." He slammed a palm lightly on the counter, just enough to make the sound echo in the marble room. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you don't leave voluntarily, I will have security escort you out and we will contact the local police for trespassing." She felt the tremor of fear spike in her chest, cold and electric. But she strangled it down. She would not show it. "Do it," she said, voice like cut glass. "But first say it to everyone here. Say you're refusing my business. Say you're accusing me of fraud. Say it." His mouth opened, but no sound came. Brent cleared his throat. "She's just trying to get something for nothing," he muttered in a stage whisper that wasn't quiet at all, eyes sliding to the line behind her, inviting them all to join in the condemnation. "Probably doesn't even have the right paperwork. Thinks she can come in here and scam the bank." The words were a poison cloud. She felt them settle in the air, heard the shifting feet, the uncomfortable coughs, the way people avoided looking at her. She turned her eyes slowly, deliberately, to the customers. A mother clutching her toddler's hand pretended to be deeply fascinated with her phone. The old man blinked rapidly, face coloring with embarrassment. The teenager outright stared at her, lips parted in surprise. No one said a word in her defense. The manager cleared his throat, seizing on Brent's words like a lifeline. "We have to protect the bank, ma'am. We have to protect our customers. I'm sorry, but these sums can attract a certain type of activity. It's not personal." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. It's not personal? You've made it personal since I walked in here. He didn't flinch. Please leave. Now, she didn't move. She watched him. Watched the flush of embarrassment war with the cold certainty of someone who knew he could make the rules up as he went along and no one would stop him. Brent's smirk returned, broader now. He leaned forward over his window. Look, lady, just admit you don't have the right paperwork. Stop wasting everyone's time. The words dripped with contempt, and he didn't bother hiding it anymore. She felt the humiliation burn in her chest like a brand. She could feel every eye on her, every judgment, every whisper of angry black woman they wouldn't say out loud, but she could hear anyway. She drew in a slow, steady breath, forcing her hands to unclench. She wanted to scream. She wanted to slap the smirk off Brent's face. She stopped squarely in front of Brent's window. He looked at her with thinly veiled disgust. The manager appeared at his side in seconds, drawn by the inevitable gravity of her presence. She didn't wait for them to speak. She placed the check squarely on the counter between them, her hand resting over it like a protective shield. "We're going to finish this," she said evenly. Brent's lip curled. "You're not serious." She didn't blink. "I'm completely serious. You're going to deposit this check, or you're going to explain in writing why you're refusing to do so." The manager shifted, trying for a placating tone that sounded like a parent negotiating with an uncooperative child. "Ma'am, I think we've already been through this. We asked you to leave." She shook her head once, slowly. "I'm not leaving. Not until you do your job." The manager's mouth flattened into a thin line. "We don't have to serve anyone who is disruptive." She laughed once, humorless and sharp. "Disruptive? You mean refusing to accept being treated like a criminal?" Brent snorted. "You're wasting everyone's time." He reached for the check, fingers curling around it. She didn't move her hand. For a second their fingers brushed, tense, locked in a silent war over a piece of paper that represented months of her work and her company's reputation. Finally, she lifted her hand with slow, deliberate dignity, refusing to snatch it away like she'd lost. Brent picked up the check and waved it mockingly between his fingers. "This little piece of paper isn't proof of anything," he said, voice pitched just loud enough for the gathered customers to hear. "You think you can just come in here and hand us a giant sum of money and expect no questions? No proof? You think we're stupid." She clenched her jaw. "Process it. That's your job." The manager held up a hand to silence her, looking tired of the charade of politeness. "We've already told you. Without additional documentation, we can't verify this. And given your behavior today, I'm afraid you're no longer welcome at this branch." Her eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, she'd expected this, but in controlled fury. "You're banning me?" He didn't even flinch. "Yes, you're banned from this location. Permanently." She drew in a sharp breath. "For what?" "For demanding you do your job." The manager's tone cooled even further. "For being disruptive. For refusing to comply with our verification procedures. For harassing my staff." Brent made a small sound that was halfway between a scoff and a laugh. "If she even owns anything," he muttered. She turned to Brent, fixing him with a glare that could have peeled paint. "Say it louder," she said, voice dropping low. "Say what you really mean." Brent didn't say anything more. He just held the check in both hands now, fingers pressing the paper so tightly that it began to crumple. The manager gestured. "Hand it back to her." But Brent shook his head slowly, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "Actually, she's banned, right? And she's refusing to follow procedure. That makes this check void." Her eyes snapped to the manager, waiting for him to correct his employee, to show any sign of understanding that this was going too far. The manager didn't say anything. He didn't stop Brent. He just watched. Brent turned the check deliberately so she could see it, then stamped it with a giant red void in slow, deliberate motions. The sound of the stamp slamming onto the paper echoed across the suddenly silent lobby like a gunshot. She flinched despite herself. Brent held it up so she could see the damage. "Oops," he said softly. Then he tore it once down the middle. And again. And again. Tiny fluttering scraps of paper fell to the counter, between them like confetti at the world's cruelest party. She stared at the ruined pieces, vision blurring at the edges but refusing to let the tears fall. She wouldn't give them that. She wouldn't give them anything. The manager exhaled, tired and resigned. "I think it's time for you to leave." She didn't speak. She opened her bag with shaking fingers and pulled out the scraps of the check. She looked at them for a long time, turning them over with deliberate care, pressing the jagged edges together, as if by sheer force of will she could undo what he'd done. But the red void stamp was clear even on the fragments. They had made it worthless. Worthless because he had decided it was worthless. Her mouth twisted into a hard, humorless smile. She slipped the scraps back into her bag with infinite precision, then drew out her phone. She scrolled to a number she didn't even need to look for, because she had called it so many times over the years, the direct line of her chief financial officer. She pressed the button and held the phone to her ear, waiting as it rang once, twice. He picked up immediately, his voice calm and crisp even at this early hour. "Good morning, Ms. Jones. Everything okay? I just got your email about the delay." She swallowed once, composing herself so her voice wouldn't tremble, wouldn't break. "Not a delay," she said softly, though her words were razor-sharp. "A change of plans." He was silent for just a beat, reading the edge in her voice. "I'm listening," he said carefully. She inhaled, letting the cold air burn her lungs clean. "Pull everything. Today. Every cent." He didn't respond immediately. She heard the faint sounds of his keyboard in the background, the click of his mouse. "You want to clarify?" She didn't blink. "Close every account with Brantford National Bank. Corporate, operating, payroll, credit lines, sweep accounts. I want it all transferred by COB today. No exceptions. No delays." His voice was measured, but she could hear the tension coil like a wire. "We're talking all of it? That's billions in assets." She could picture him blinking at his monitor, watching the balances tick by. "All of it," she repeated evenly. "I want the formal withdrawal notice sent to their headquarters within the hour. I want the transfer paperwork initiated immediately. I want our lawyers ready to answer any pushback. And I want it all documented." He exhaled slowly on the other end. She could hear the awe in his voice. "Understood. May I ask what happened?" She closed her eyes briefly. In her mind, she saw Brent smirk as he stamped void in thick red ink. She saw the manager's stiff, indifferent face. She saw the lobby full of customers watching her like she was an animal at the zoo. She opened her eyes again, sharp as broken glass. They refused to deposit a payment, accused me of fraud, tore up the check, banned me from a branch. He swore softly under his breath, a rare slip from her typically unflappable CFO. "Say no more," he said quickly. "I'll handle it." She nodded even though he couldn't see her. "One more thing," she added. "When you send the notice, copy every executive at Brantford National. Make it explicit. Make it clear exactly why." He didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. She stood there for a moment longer, letting the wind tug at her hair and bite at her cheeks, letting her heart slow. The street around her was busy with morning traffic, cars crawling through green lights, delivery trucks double-parked, people hurrying with coffee cups in gloved hands. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She turned and began walking back toward her office, every step gaining purpose, the humiliation inside her slowly alchemizing into something colder, harder, deadlier. She was not someone they could banish. She was not someone they could dismiss. She was not someone they could reduce to scraps of worthless paper. Not anymore. As she neared her building, she could feel her phone vibrating in her pocket over and over. She ignored it until she was in the lobby. Then she pulled it out. It was her CFO. She picked up. "Update?" she asked. He didn't waste time. "It's done. I sent the formal withdrawal request to the bank's treasury department, the regional VP, and the entire executive board. I also copied our legal team. Total amount being moved today is over $3.2 billion. She felt her lips tighten in a semblance of a smile. She glanced at the torn check fragments now neatly stacked on the corner of her desk, a small monument to everything that had transpired. The red void stamp was still clearly visible even on the shreds. She felt the old anger pulse once, hot and sharp, but she forced it down. She didn't need anger now. She needed precision. She needed strategy. She needed to make them feel it. Her phone vibrated on the desk, and she picked it up without checking the ID. Her PR director's voice was clipped and efficient. "We've got reporters calling already. Someone at the bank leaked the withdrawal order to the press. Treasury's in meltdown." She smiled humorlessly. "Good. Let them panic." The director cleared his throat softly. "We drafted the statement. It's direct, but not emotional. It lays out the facts. The refusal to process your deposit. The demand for unnecessary documentation. The destruction of the check. The ban. It explains why we're pulling all funds. It also calls out the systemic nature of this kind of bias without naming names in a way that gets us sued. Do you want to review it?" She considered. "Read it to me." He did. It was professional, cool, devastating. She let him finish. "Release it," she said. "Now." "Copy," he replied, and hung up without another word. She sat back, exhaling slowly. She let her eyes drift over the city outside her windows, watching the traffic crawl between glass towers that gleamed in the pale light. Somewhere down there was that bank branch, with its neat rows of tellers and its smug, smirking manager who had decided she was not the right kind of customer. Somewhere down there, Brent would be back at his window, folding his arms, maybe even bragging about how he'd sent her packing. Let him brag. She wanted him to have that last taste of arrogance before the world fell in on them. Her assistant knocked once and poked his head in. "We're seeing chatter on social already. Business news sites are picking it up. They're quoting our statement." She nodded once. "Good." He hesitated. "You're going to want to see this." He stepped fully inside and turned his tablet to face her. On the screen was the homepage of the biggest financial news site in the country. The headline was massive in bold. "Corporate client pulls $3.2 billion from Branford National over alleged discrimination." She read it twice, letting the words settle into her bones. The subhead was even better. "CEO cites bias, destruction of payment check, issues blistering public statement." She watched the live stock ticker crawl under the headline. Branford National's share price was red, bleeding, down 7% in less than an hour. She let the smallest of smiles curve her lips. "Leave it with me," she said quietly. Her assistant nodded and slipped out, leaving her alone with a tablet glowing in front of her. She turned it slowly in her hands, watching the story scroll by. Quotes from her statement were already being dissected on live TV. Analysts were calling in. Commentators were offering solemn head shakes about reputational risk. She set the tablet aside and opened her laptop again. She pulled up her email and began typing a second, even more direct statement to her entire vendor and partner list. It was short, brutal. "We no longer bank with Branford National due to discriminatory practices that culminated in the destruction of our payment check and my removal from the branch for demanding equal treatment. We encourage all partners who value equity and respect to reconsider their relationships with institutions that engage in such behavior." She hit send. She knew the power of that email, knew that vendors who relied on her payments would follow her new banking instructions immediately, knew that other corporate partners would see that note, remember their own uneasiness, and consider their options. The power wasn't just in the money she was pulling. It was in the example she was setting, the precedent. She leaned back and let her eyes close for just a moment. When she opened them, the phone was ringing again. It was her CFO. She picked up. "They're calling me now," he said without greeting. "Corporate Treasury, Regional VP, even someone claiming to be from the CEO's office. They want to talk to you. Full update. Contingency planning." She wanted everyone aligned, because this wasn't finished yet. Not even close. She glanced at her phone screen again and saw one headline that made her pause. She clicked it and read with careful satisfaction. "Branford National suspends 2 employees pending investigation." The article named no names, but she knew who it was. She could see them in her mind as clear as day. Brent, arms crossed behind the teller window, smirking like he'd won something by humiliating her in public. The manager with his careful corporate diction and stiff posture, rehearsing ways to say you don't belong here without using those words. She imagined them both being called into a cold office, told they were done, told they had embarrassed the brand, told they had cost the bank billions and torpedoed their own careers over nothing but arrogance. She hoped they felt the sting. She hoped they remembered her face every time they updated their resumes and tried to explain the gap in their work history. She read on. The article detailed how Branford National's executive board had launched an internal investigation within hours of the withdrawal going public. It cited multiple unnamed sources confirming that the branch's surveillance footage had been reviewed, that audio logs were being transcribed, that complaints about the branch had been quietly accumulating for months, but hadn't been deemed credible until now. She smiled without humor. Credible. Only credible when the person complaining could yank $3 billion in deposits. Only credible when the stock dropped enough to scare shareholders into asking questions. Only credible when the problem was no longer deniable. She scrolled further and saw an even more satisfying sentence. Sources inside the bank confirm that several senior executives are also under scrutiny for failing to act on previous bias complaints and are expected to resign in the coming days. She read that one twice. She let herself savor it. She knew exactly how those conference calls were going. She could imagine the clipped voices, the lawyerly phrasing, the HR managers trying to sound neutral while offering resignation packages with confidentiality clauses attached. She knew there would be anger and embarrassment and half-baked defenses about how they hadn't known, hadn't understood, hadn't realized it was that bad. She knew the bank would try to contain the damage, that they would talk about a few bad apples and unfortunate misunderstandings and training opportunities. She knew none of it was enough. She wanted the whole system gutted. She wanted them to fear another customer walking out with everything. She wanted them to understand that this wasn't charity. This was power. She set her phone down and looked at the scraps of the check on her desk again. She had thought about throwing them away, burning them, shredding them to dust so she would never have to see that red void again. But she didn't. She left them there as a reminder, as proof. Her assistant knocked on the door and slipped inside without waiting. "We're getting calls from other banks," he said, voice pitched with the careful excitement of someone trying to stay professional, but clearly enjoying the turn of events. "They're falling over themselves to offer us incentives to move everything over." She snorted once. "Of course they are." He hesitated. "You want to take those calls?" She thought about it for a second. Then she nodded. "Yes, but not today. They can wait. They can sit and wonder how badly they want this money, how well they're going to have to treat us to get it." He nodded quickly. Understood. He started to leave, but paused at the door. "There's also media requests for comment. CNN, Wall Street Journal, even a couple of morning shows. They want interviews." She considered. "Draft responses. For now, keep it tight. We're not performing for them. We already said what happened. Let them talk about it on their own." He nodded again, a small grin on his face. "Got it." She turned back to her laptop and opened a new document. She began drafting a formal letter addressed to the board of Branford National. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. Not exactly. But it was close enough. She outlined the full experience in clear, professional language. She documented the refusal to process the check, the demands for extra proof no one else was asked for, the manager's refusal to define policy, the public threats to call police, the deliberate humiliations, and the final insult of stamping and destroying the check while customers watched. She ended it with a single stark sentence. "Your branch manager and your teller made this decision. Your company owns it." She read it over once. Then she closed the document. She would send it when she was ready. She wasn't done yet. She stood slowly and walked to the window, watching the city churn with life. Somewhere down there, the bank's executives were huddled in crisis meetings. She could imagine them scrambling, drafting press releases, running cost-benefit analyses about firing people versus losing customers. Weeks passed, but the story refused to die. It was everywhere, in the ticker at the bottom of business news shows, in op-eds that debated corporate responsibility, in social media posts that dissected every word of her public statement. The bank's name had become shorthand for failure, for arrogance exposed. She watched it all from her office, refusing most interview requests, staying silent except for that single statement she'd issued at the beginning. She didn't need to perform outrage or sell her pain for clicks. The facts spoke for themselves. She focused on running her company, growing it, proving that one institution's refusal couldn't halt her momentum for even a moment. Vendors adapted. Partners followed her new banking instructions. Clients voiced quiet solidarity. Meanwhile, Brantford National squirmed under the spotlight. They fired the manager and the teller outright, their polite press releases calling it a commitment to restoring trust. Then the headlines turned to the boardroom. Senior executives began resigning in what the press called a bloodletting, each one issuing the same robotic statements about taking responsibility. The bank stock price clawed back only slightly, weighed down by the uncertainty of ongoing investigations and potential class action suits now coalescing in federal court. She read the filings with professional interest. She didn't join the suits herself, not yet. She didn't need to. She had her own leverage. One gray afternoon, she received an email flagged urgent. It was from the new acting CEO of Brantford National. The tone was carefully conciliatory, layered in apology. It requested a meeting, virtual or in person, to discuss the path forward. She ignored it. A day later, it was her lawyer who called. "They're serious about talking," he said. She didn't answer immediately. She swiveled in her chair to look at the torn check fragments still resting on her desk, now framed behind glass like an exhibit in a museum. A reminder. "Fine," she said at last. "Set it up." When the meeting began a few days later, she logged in to see a sea of anxious corporate faces in little digital boxes, all forced smiles and thinly veiled dread. The acting CEO cleared his throat. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. Jones. We want to begin by offering an unqualified apology for what you experienced." She didn't respond. She watched them sweat. He went on, explaining they'd completed their internal investigation. He used words like unacceptable and contrary to our values. He listed the changes they had planned. New training, new oversight. They had partnered with diversity consultants. They had created an internal review board. She listened, expression unreadable. When he finally stopped talking, she spoke in a low, even voice. "That's nice, but you haven't apologized to me, personally." The silence was thick. Then, to her surprise, one of the faces in the call shifted forward. It was the former branch manager. He looked older already, worn in a way she recognized. His voice cracked slightly. "Ms. Jones," he began. I'm sorry. I didn't see it when it was happening. I told myself it was policy, that I was being cautious, but the truth is I didn't question why I was treating you differently. I was wrong." He swallowed. The teller was there too, eyes downcast. When he spoke, it was flat but honest. "I was an asshole. I thought I was being careful, but I was just being cruel. I'm sorry." She sat there, listening without moving. She weighed them, their words, their fear, their regret. At last she let out a slow breath. "What you did was humiliating. It was disrespectful. It was racist." Neither of them interrupted. Neither denied it. She continued, "But you're owning it now. I don't have to forgive you, but I hear you." She saw the relief and pain mix on their faces. She turned her gaze back to the CEO. "You wanted to discuss a path forward?" He nodded quickly. "We want to make amends, not just to you, but to the community. We're establishing a permanent fund for minority-owned businesses. We're launching anti-bias training across every branch. And we want your input, if you'll give it, on how to make sure no one goes through what you did." She let the silence stretch before replying. "It's a start," she said finally. "But it's your responsibility to fix this, not mine." The CEO swallowed. "Understood." She leaned back. "I'll offer advice, not to make you look good, to make you actually be better." But if I ever see you using my name for PR without permission, the goodwill is over." He nodded solemnly. The meeting ended. She logged off without ceremony. She sat there for a long moment, the quiet of her office pressing in around her. She looked at the framed scraps of the check, the red void still mocking her. Then she turned away, picked up her phone, and called her assistant. "Schedule a meeting with the leadership team," she said. "We have new partnerships to plan." She hung up. Outside, the city continued to move, unaware. She allowed herself one final exhale and let the anger ebb away. There was work to do. There were people to hire, contracts to win, lives to change. She had no interest in staying small to make anyone comfortable ever again. She would be seen. She would be heard. She would not be told to leave quietly. And if the world couldn't handle that, the world would have to change. The end. If you've been following along with this story of injustice, power, and hard-won change, I'd love to hear what you think. Did the plot keep you hooked? Which part hit hardest? Where are you watching or reading from today? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. I genuinely want to know how this landed for you. And if you want more stories like this, full of drama, real stakes, and meaningful resolutions, make sure to like this post and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support helps bring these stories to life and keeps the conversation going about the change we all want to see. Let's talk about it together.